Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Cole Anderson, your host today. Please do consider supporting this channel. You can do that either through Patreon or through PayPal. I have links to both sites in the description box below if you want to make a financial contribution. And thank you to everybody who is already a contributor. I really appreciate your support. This video probably seems like a bit of a funny departure from my usual content. Usually I like to highlight repertoire which is a little bit off the beaten track, or by composers who don't get heard that often, like Fanny Mendelssohn or Percy Grainger are two composers like that I've done in the past. However, I really have nothing against playing a tried and true favorite like this bagatelle by Beethoven, popularly called Für Elise. That title, of course, is actually the dedication that the first editor of the work, Ludwig Noll, cited as being on the manuscript. But in reality, the piece fits neatly into the genre of the bagatelle that Beethoven used often later in his career, and some 10 or 12 years later from the first version of this piece, Beethoven actually seems to have been considering including this little piece in a collection of bagatelles, but he never actually got around to finishing his revision and actually publishing it. Maybe he didn't think it was good enough, or maybe it didn't fit in with other works that he was including in one of those sets. There is, however, another slightly different version of this piece available out there, edited by Barry Cooper, which it's well worth taking a look at. Personally, I prefer this slightly simpler original version, but it's debatable. This video topic, by the way, was inspired by a video on the Soundfield channel. I link to the original video in the description box. And they did a really excellent job of outlining the background of the piece and the uncertainty as to who the dedicatee of the work is even supposed to be. There's no less than 3 possible suspects. All that, of course, is made even more complicated since the manuscript disappeared soon after the initial publication in the 1860s. In that video, the pianist-composer Nare Sol took the part of the Fur Elise critic. And I'll just make a quick disclaimer here. I really admire Nare Sol's work. She's a very interesting composer and a great pianist as well. She constantly experiments with fascinating ideas, particularly with incorporating non-classical genres into her concert music, which she does very successfully. So that disclaimer out of the way, I have to say I was not very convinced by her criticism of this piece. Although she did point out correctly, I think, that the main theme of Für Elise is very simple, almost schematic, and that it does not have the kind of depth of feeling or harmonic tension that is present in some of Beethoven's greatest melodies. She cites the slow movement from the Pathétique Sonata, which is a great example of a really inspired Beethoven melody. So with Fur Elise, I think that criticizing the piece on the grounds of the triteness of the opening theme is a little bit missing the point, as I think the merit of the piece is not so much in the intrinsic quality of the theme, which is certainly limited, I'd agree with that, but it's rather in how Beethoven develops this theme in the 2 contrasting episodes. Beethoven has many very memorable pieces which start from fairly unassuming material, like this one, for example. So in that example from the 7th Symphony is not so much the main theme, which is pretty plain from a rhythmic, harmonic, and melodic standpoint, that makes the piece interesting and exciting, it's how Beethoven develops it. If you listen to the whole movement, it's extraordinary what he does with this simple material. And even in a little teeny piece like this, Beethoven is actually operating in exactly the same way. In a typical kind of dense motivic construction for Beethoven, almost everything in the entire piece is derived somehow from the opening four measures. First, Beethoven presents a half-step motive, the famous motive. Then a descending line from E down to A, with the notes slightly rearranged. And then an ascending line moving back up from A towards E. In the second half of the theme, Beethoven makes these ideas even clearer. He reverses their order, but they're even in sharper focus, and he also adds in a kind of half-step idea from E, F, back to E, which is an inversion of the opening half-step idea. So in the B section lead in, we find those ascending and descending lines concealed and combined. Then even more interestingly, the new, quite strikingly beautiful melody in the B section is clearly developed from these three main ideas. So the half step, the descending line, and the ascending line. Again, these ideas are found developed in the little cadenza-like passage that ends the section, as well as a nod towards the opening of the piece. In the C section, which kind of has the quality of a coda, the melodic outline is again derived pretty clearly from these three main motives. Additionally, the E-F-E motive is highlighted very clearly. But beyond that, Beethoven also composes the half-step idea into the harmony, so strikingly by raising the bass line from a tonic pedal point to the flat 2. The final cadenza that ends this section not only ties the C section back to the B section, which had a similar construction with a cadenza closing it out, but it also acts as a dramatization of our three main motives again, this time in very close succession. So the ascending line is expanded to an arpeggio, and the half-step idea is expanded into a full chromatic scale. So you can see from all this that this little piece is actually constructed in a remarkably resourceful and economical way. I just wanted to point this out so that if you like this piece, you can realize that there's really a reason why you instinctively like it. Not only is it short and catchy, but it also is very expertly constructed. So all the ideas lead one from the other, and we, I think, instinctively feel this. It's not usually mentioned when we talk about Beethoven, but he was one of the first composers to write in a genre, these short pieces that he called bagatelles, that clearly led to the short romantic character pieces of the 19th century. He was certainly not the only one. You would have to also mention composers like Schubert and John Field, but certainly his very idiosyncratic contribution should be remembered. He even did this in works that are nominally in the classical sonata form. So, for example, in the first movement of his Opus 109 piano sonata, it's clearly a bagatelle. And also, if you think about the second movement of his Opus 90 piano sonata, I mean, if you didn't know that it was by Beethoven, you might guess that it was a Mendelssohn song without words. So anyway, thank you for watching the video. I hope this gives you perhaps a newfound respect for Beethoven's craft in putting together this seemingly trifling little piece. And now here's a complete performance of the work.